All right, so our next special speaker, and gosh, I don't even know where to begin. I'll get like emotional talking about her because I just love her. You know, she's been in my home, seen my kids, gone to church with me. She's just amazing. But not only is she a dear friend, she is amazing when it comes to collections and working out assets. Because where do we make money in this business, guys? There's no such thing as a bad note, just bad pricing. Thank you. And so we make money there, and then we really make the money, because it's an illiquid investment, these non-performing loans, we make it on the workout. And so I don't know, there's very few people that I know that have more experience in asset management and working out loans than our next guest, who's worked for a few different hedge funds. She's worked for several different banks and just has years and years of experience, well over a decade worth of years of experience, and we're extremely grateful that she flew out here to be with you and serve you guys and for that opportunity. And so please give our next guest a huge, huge round of applause, Ms. Saprina Allen.
Thank you. Love you too. Well, hello, everyone. Where's the clicker?
The green button.
Okay. Making FDCPA your friend is the best thing that you can do to keep the money that you're going to make in notes. A lot of you want to do it freestyle and do it your own way, and your own way can get you into a lot of trouble. How many of you currently have notes that you're actively working? How many of you email your borrowers on a regular basis? None of you. Oh, you do, okay. Did you get permission from your borrower to email them? Is that how you made your first initial contact? You got permission, that's really good. How many of you text message your borrowers when they're late on a payment and you want to remind them that they haven't gotten your payment in? Do you have permission to do that from them? That's good. And I do have slides ready, but I just kind of want to figure out what I have going on in the audience, because a lot of people want to make the borrower their friend, and they think if they can make the borrower their friends, they can actually collect money from them. That's somewhat true. But one of the hardest conversations is that first conversation that you have with your borrowers, and a lot of you actually work the debt that you own, or you are working debt that you actually have borrowed money to buy that debt. So what happens when you're doing that? Your emotions get involved. And when your emotions get involved, you can somewhat be abusive or obnoxious, just as the borrowers can be. And that's just not acceptable under FDCPA. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to start with my slides. If anybody has any questions on why they can't do something, you can go to the mic and question me, and I'll try to answer your questions the best I can. And also, this is just for informational purposes. I'm not giving you legal advice. If you want legal advice, you should actually hire an attorney, or you should maybe get in-house counsel if you have in-house counsel to give you advice on things you can and you cannot do with your borrowers. An overview of FDCPA and what is the intent of FDCPA. It is really protecting the borrower or protecting the consumer when you're attempting to collect a debt. There are certain things that you can and you cannot do. You cannot use false information, or you cannot threaten to tell someone that you're getting ready to send them to an attorney for foreclosure if you have no intentions on doing so. You cannot threaten any bodily harm, and you cannot use curse words. You cannot do a lot of things when you're interacting with the borrower. No matter, can you go to the mic, please? Fair Debt Collections Practices Act. I can't remember when it was originated, but I think it was sometime in the 70s, and it was actually to protect consumers. You have, I'd say, cowboys in our industry will buy a note, and they will actually go and knock on the door and say, hey, when are you going to get out of my house? That is not an appropriate way to do collections on something that you have a secured mortgage on. And her question was, what is FDCPA? So I just basically stated what that stands for. Important definitions. A consumer is a natural person obligated or allegedly obligated to pay back a debt. A debt is anything that you have basically borrowed, you've gotten merchandise for, or you've actually had a service for, and you actually are required to pay it back, and you sign a promissory note. And on our behalf, they sign a promissory note, a mortgage, or a deed of trust. A debt collector is any person attempting to recover that money or recover the asset, such as our properties that we have as collateral. And I'll leave the slides up if you want to take a picture of them for a moment before I go into the next slide. You can't do certain things when you are trying to collect that debt. And one of the things you cannot do is that you cannot discuss the debt with a third party, meaning a mother, a father, a brother, a sister, unless you have a third party authorization. How many of you in your welcome packages or sometime communicating with your borrowers actually send out a borrower's authorization to the borrower to have on file? I highly recommend that if you are communicating with a borrower and you're on good terms with the borrower, you never know when that's going to go south. So you should always get a borrower's authorization, especially if you're working a second loan or a second mortgage, so you can actually get information from a first mortgage holder. Sometimes if you see a judgment on a borrower's credit report or a tax lien, if you actually have that borrower's authorization, it will give you the ability to get information on those other debts. You cannot call a borrower before 8 a.m. and after 9 p.m. So if you have debt in other time zones, make sure that you know that you're not calling a borrower at 5:30 in the morning because they're in California. So make sure that you mark what time zone that your borrower is located in. You cannot call a borrower if they are represented by counsel. You cannot communicate with them by text message, by email, by phone. If you get a letter of representation from a borrower or an attorney that they're representing a borrower, you cannot communicate with that borrower unless you get the attorney's permission. So if a borrower files a Chapter 7 or a Chapter 13 and it's active, do not contact the borrower. You are violating FDCPA. And some of you think that it's okay to call the borrower if you can't get a hold of the attorney. If you know that they are represented by counsel and you don't want to write a check, because most attorneys will actually file a complaint and they will sue you, and you could be fined for reaching out to their borrowers when they're protected under being represented by an attorney. You cannot also, again, threaten. You just cannot threaten to do something to a borrower that you don't intend on doing. If you don't intend on foreclosing, don't tell them you're going to foreclose. Could you go to the mic, please?
So if someone is discharged from their BK7, am I not allowed to if they're discharged, they're no longer represented by counsel? Is that correct then?
When you contact them, what are you contacting them for?
Not to collect debt, just to
Good
sign
answer.
a deed in lieu.
Good answer. You can contact them, but another layer of protection that I do, I actually will contact the bankruptcy attorney to get permission to contact the borrower to see what their intentions are, or to see if sometimes the attorney will actually help you communicate. I just actually made contact with a borrower's attorney either yesterday or today. I can't remember. Everything is running together. And he actually said that he would reach out to the borrower to see if they would be willing to do a deed in lieu. It's a really, really great area when you are starting to communicate with a borrower after they've been discharged from a Chapter 7. If they are dismissed from a Chapter 13, yes, you are allowed to contact the borrower. If they are dismissed from a Chapter 13, you can communicate with the borrower. If you get a cease and desist means just that. If they tell you not to communicate with them any further, you cannot. Even if they're not represented by counsel, you just have to move forward with whatever actions you plan on taking. If they give you a cease and desist, make sure you document the date and time you got the cease and desist order. A lot of times someone will verbally tell you cease and desist. That is really enough under FDCPA if they log it and they document it. You should request for them to give you that in writing and give them a fax number or an email address that they can actually send that information to. And I keep saying don't. And you can't harass. And what do I mean by harass? You can't call a borrower at 8 o'clock in the morning, and if they hang up on you, you can't call them back at 8:05. You can't call them 4 or 5 times a day. You can call several times, but as soon as you leave a message or you make contact, you can no longer make contact with them in that same day. It's really good to possibly reach out to them every other day until you make contact. So I do Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or sometimes I'll do Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. And I always rotate my days on when I'm trying to contact them. And I leave one message a day. Don't leave multiple messages, and don't tell them what you're trying to reach them about on their voicemail. Again, I already talked about you can't use profanity, you can't use poor choice of words when you are actually communicating with them and you're having a conversation. I don't care how much they yell, I don't care how much they cuss, I don't care if they tell you to go jump off a bridge. You still need to remain professional and calm, and it's really, sometimes it's hard to do when you're thinking about this person hasn't made a mortgage payment in at least 3 to 5 years, and they're doing whatever they want to do, and I have to abide by the law. When you decide to invest in notes, you can go ahead and go to the mic. You remember it's an investment.
So if you leave them a message, what can you leave them a message about?
I think it might be further down in my slides, but I'll go ahead and I'll do something for you quick.
And then I heard another second part of the question is I heard you can maybe only contact them 3 times in 1 week, whether it's via email or text or call.
Well, if you don't have an arrangement.
Okay.
So if you have an arrangement with them, so if you make an arrangement with the borrower today and they don't do what they're going to do by next Wednesday, or no, today's Thursday, next Thursday, and you don't have what they said they were going to do, you can pick up and do a follow-up call, or you could even do a reminder call the day before. But if they're just basically not giving you any arrangements, you just can't call them every single day, because that is considered harassment. So if you talk to them with no resolution on Monday, maybe on Wednesday you give them a call back. If no resolution on Wednesday, you give them a call back on Friday. And that's not really considered harassment, because there's no resolution and you're just trying to attempt to help them. But depending on the delinquency, sometimes you need to get their attention, you need to move forward with other actions, such as a breach letter or eternal demand letter, or seeking outside counsel to send them a letter. Did I have another question over here? Okay. And, what type of message can I leave? Gray area. You can tell where you're calling from. You can't tell them that you're calling them about their delinquent message, because you don't know who's going to receive the message. So if I was calling Mr. Jones, I would say this is a personal and private business message for Mr. Jones. If you're not Mr. Jones, please hang up or bypass this message now. There will be a 3-second pause, and then I'm going to leave a message. Then if it's not Mr. Jones shouldn't be listening to it. So I can say, this is Saprina Allen calling from Capstone Funding Group. This is an attempt to collect a debt. Any information obtained will be used for that purpose. The call may be monitored or recorded for quality and training purposes. You're leaving that on their voicemail. You're letting them know, and you're giving them a disclosure. And that's a whole bunch to say in a message on somebody's voicemail. Sometimes that makes somebody really, really mad, because my husband got that message and he had no idea I hadn't made my mortgage payment in 3 years. So sometimes it's a good thing to do. You didn't say it was a mortgage payment. You said it was a personal and private business message. You also said there was an attempt to collect a debt, but you didn't say what the debt was for. But you also named your company. Most of us don't have a mortgage company. Well, some of us have an investment behind it or a capital behind, but it doesn't really say that we're calling from a bank. So that's a way that has actually gone through the red tape, and it's an allowed message through FDCPA. The ACA will actually give you scripting for that. And I may actually have it on here, but I'm not for sure what I've actually included in my slides. What constitutes false and misleading? You can't tell them that they owe you $150,000 and they actually owe you $100,000. So make sure when you're communicating with your borrowers, you're either going low if you don't have an exact payoff, or you actually have calculated what the total past due is before you tell them what they owe you. Any communication that you send out to them in reference to how much that they owe you, make sure that that information is correct before you send it out. You cannot say that you are an attorney or you're an attorney's office if you are not an attorney or an attorney's office. You cannot threaten to garnish their wages. You can't threaten to put a judgment. You can't threaten to do anything that you don't intend to do. Your initial communication, the first time you send a letter to a borrower in reference to a debt, there's certain information that you need to communicate to them. And you also need to have the mini Miranda on them. You'll hear me say, did you Mirandize the borrower? And it's basically, this communication is from a debt collector. This is an attempt to collect a debt. Any information used will be obtained for that purpose. And they have a validation notice. So a lot of times, you guys will get a QWR when you initially send out your hello letter. And that's a qualified written response. Don't panic. Basically, it's another stall tactic, and a lot of borrowers are doing it. And they're doing a lot of cut and paste from the internet because people talk to people, and that's just something that they're doing. In your validation notice, there are certain certain pieces of information that is required to be in your validation notice. The amount of the debt, the name of the creditor, if they are intending on disputing the debt, that they should actually do that within the first 30 days. Notification can be requested for verification of the debt within 30 days. So what does that mean? Some of you don't have collateral and you're sending out demand letters. So if you don't have collateral and you don't have your note, and you don't have your mortgage, if somebody requests for you to validate that you own that debt, guess what you can't do? You can't validate your debt because you don't have all your appropriate information. So be careful on how aggressive you plan on being when you don't have all the pieces of the puzzle in order to do that. Federal law versus state law. There are federal laws that you are governed by, and there's also state laws that you're governed by. And there's a whole lot of laws that you need to know. And sometimes that's why we suggest that you use a licensed servicer. And did you hear me say a licensed servicer? I didn't say a servicer that's not licensed. I'm just being honest. Make sure that you do your homework on your servicers when you're placing your debt with the servicers to make sure that they can actually do what you need them to do, and they're going to be compliant so you don't get caught up into some legal issues that you didn't even plan on having because you're dealing with a servicer that's not licensed.
Saprina,
Yes,
are they licensed by the states or federally?
By the state, a lot of them. So some states require you to just register. You have to register that you're going to be doing business in their state. That's more for tax purposes. But there are some states that you actually have to have someone goes into that state and actually will test for the debt collections practice part of it. So Nevada, you have to test. Tennessee, you have to take a written test. Where else did I take a test? Chicago, so Illinois, I had to take a test because I went to Chicago. Just off the top of my head, those are a few places that I had to actually physically go and I had to take tests when I ran a collection agency. So you can actually be sued, and I talked about your checkbook. And you can be sued for attorney fees, actual damages, and well, what damages can a borrower have because I did something? Well, you caused them to have a nervous breakdown, it was emotional distress, it was a whole lot of things. So you have to really think about what you do. And Matt Kelly, he said that I would say that there's a heartbeat in every home, even when a homeowner hasn't paid their bills. Regardless if you think that you are or you're not causing emotional stress, just watch your tone, watch how you talk to them, watch what you do, and it does make a difference, and you'll become more successful. Any questions? How many of you who are actually, so now I have questions for you guys. How many of you who are actually collecting your debt have an 800 number? Oh, that's good. So what you need to know is that you have to have the ability for a borrower to call you, collect, or have a 1-800 number. The other thing is when the borrower actually makes the first initial contact with your voicemail, if you don't have someone answering your phone, how many of you actually have a recorded line advising them that you are a debt collector? Oh, you guys have been taking notes. How many of you don't think that's a big deal that you have a 1-800 number or you actually have that disclosure that 123 Investments is a debt collector or attempting to collect a debt? Do you guys think that that's important or not? Because it really is. Sam, I'm going to pick on you. I'm sorry. Sam and I were going through this thing about back and forth with email. And even through the communication of email on what he could do or what he couldn't do, I had to pick up the phone and I think I had to call him or I sent him a text message. I was like, no, you can't do that. And it's just one of those things is that when you don't know and you think that it's okay, the things that you think that is okay is those things that can get you into trouble. Sam, could you come up to the mic, please? I'm sorry. Can you tell me one of the things that you thought it was okay to do with a borrower?
Well, my question to you was just like, why can't we communicate via email? Because then you've got it documented and everything. And so it would be documented that, hey, I didn't cross the line or whatnot.
And one of the things that I want to point out to you, see how innocent he sounds? I got the
I'm very innocent,
documentation. Yeah. But you don't know who's on the receiving end of that email on that communication. And someone could actually open that. My brother could get that and tell my husband on me that I haven't paid the mortgage payment and he has no idea because he's over in Iraq, and create huge confusion. And even though you don't think that's a big idea, a big deal, it really is a big deal. So one of the things is in your initial contact with the borrower, just put a checklist of things that you want from them. Get an email address. Get them to say it's okay to communicate by email. If it's okay to contact them by text message, get them to sign off on it and make it a part of their permanent file. It's just one of those things that you can cover yourself and you don't end up in court over something unnecessary. Was that the only big concern that you had as far as the emailing the borrower?
With email, yeah. I also about voicemails and what we could do
What
there,
you could
how we
say.
could go about it, yeah. Those are the two big ones.
Okay, well, I'll let you off the hot seat for now.
Hi, Saprina.
Hi.
They have to sign off on each thing, or can they initial by like email and phone number, text?
Normally on the communication sheet that I have, I actually just have a checkbox, yes or no. And then at the end of the sheet, I actually have them sign it. Any other questions? Okay. Oh, I have a question here.
Okay.
Aaron, you're not allowed to ask any questions. No. I'm teasing.
Okay, some people are using that overseas companies to collect the debt. They are also abiding by these rules, or
They're using what, I'm sorry?
overseas companies.
Yes. Mm-hmm. If they're actually, if it's, I'll just say it, GE Capital, actually, they farm a lot of their stuff overseas. And as long as they're employees of GE Capital, they are allowed to farm that information overseas in order to have that debt collected. So even, I know that one of the big mortgage companies who's selling off a lot of debt right now, they actually have a lot of things that are going overseas to be worked. And I don't know if I'm not allowed to say it, they'll bleep it out, but it's Aquin. Aquin's putting a lot of stuff overseas right now and having people in India do the debt collecting piece of it. And they seem to be a little bit more successful because a lot of their portfolios that are coming out are sub-performing, where you see at least a payment here and there, more of a scattered payment, and they're getting more bang for their buck in reference to the labor part of the collections piece.
I don't really have a question.
Oh, well, that's good. No, that would have been Travis. I'm sorry. That would have been Travis with 10 million questions.
That's right. That's right. Definitely not me. So can we please give Saprina a big round of applause?